The Kimbell's a major institution. Every major institution has an identity, and that identity is predicated on both its mission and its character.
In 1935, Kay and Velma Kimbell bought their first painting. The following year, the Kimbells set up the Kimbell Art Foundation, along with Kay's sister Maddie and her husband, Dr. Coleman Carter. In order to make the collection available to the people of Fort Worth and the region, the paintings were originally exhibited all over town, in places like schools, libraries, and churches. And the Kimbell Art Foundation continued to collect paintings on up until the death of Kay Kimbell in 1964. At that time, the Kimbell Art Foundation set about building an art museum to house the foundation's collection.
So I looked into it some more and realized that indeed it was probably the best opportunity anywhere in the history of making museums.
Richard Brown, the first director who chose Louis Kahn to design the building, wanted the building to be a work of art.
Rick always wanted to have the flexibility, but not by devices, but by how the spaces evoked flexibility. We met very well on this subject.
One of the wonderful things about Louis Kahn's design for the Kimbell is how easily you can understand it as you approach. First, you see this great roof with its series of vaults, and then you see the porticos, or the porches, that provide shade from the hot Texas sun. These are great people places, places where people can meet and hang out, relax, and just cool down. And then you go inside, and you see those same vaults repeated in the galleries, only now Kahn creates this split down the middle to let in the daylight. Kahn understood that the Texas light is very strong, and you can't have daylight fall directly on delicate and light-sensitive artworks. So he created the diffusers that hang under the split in the roof and bounce the light back into the underside of the vault, creating this beautiful, delicate, silvery light.
Light is, of course, one of the things that every visitor to the Louis Kahn building notices the minute they walk through, this extraordinary, beautiful, diffused light.
Every work of architecture should be in natural light. And this particularly, because you were seeing works of art which are really poetry.
It's just a beautiful building to work with. It's very small, very intimate. As you can see, we're standing here in these beautiful light-filled galleries. How can you not be happy when you're standing in this space?
And never, as long as the museum remains as a building, will there be a single day like the other.
Kahn said if you didn't plan for everything, the things that were functional would come and take over your building.
Kahn's use of materials was masterful. There's this simple poured concrete, the most basic of materials, alongside panels of warm Italian travertine. The concrete looks so simple, but this is deceptive. Pouring the complex contours of the roof was tricky, but Kahn understood how to do it, and it worked brilliantly.
I think there's general agreement that the Louis Kahn building is the finest museum building in the world.
Kahn's final stroke was his wooden floor, made up of thin strips of oak, which literally glow in the light and make everyone and everything look and feel good. Kahn's use of materials was ingenious because the natural materials provide a perfect backdrop for almost everything. Consequently, you find very little painted surface in this building.
It set a standard for museums, although none of them really equals that building as a masterpiece.
the character of the building, the quality of the collection, the fact that when you go, you expect to see only great works of art, whether it's pre-Columbian, whether it's classical. You know you're not going in to see an in-depth representation of those periods. You know you're going to see something major.
The acquisitions policy is actually quite simple, and I believe that it is the only right kind of policy to have, and that is you acquire top-notch individual objects of art for whatever they may be, drawings, prints, sculpture, paintings, whatever, when you find them, and when the price is right, and you know they're authentic, and when they are definitive of the particular medium, period, or master that they represent.
The Kimbell philosophy was to have few superlative things, few really great things. And it's a very, very interesting philosophy that the Kimbell has managed to maintain for its 40 years of history.
And one of the great tests of a potential acquisition is how the work looks in the building and the Louis Kahn galleries, and also how the work stands up against the rest of the collection. And a curious thing is that a great work of art looks even stronger when hanging in the Kahn galleries.
I think that everything looks in its best light in these galleries, whether it's a painting, a decorative object, or a sculpture. Our sculpture collection is one of the most magnificent for the Asian field. And that's really running across the cultures of India, Southeast Asia, China, Japan. My most favorite piece is this wonderful Bodhisattva Maitreya, who is the Bodhisattva of the future. It dates to the 9th century. He's kind of staring straight at you, sort of like looking right into your soul. It's one of those pieces when you think of definitive excellence, that's what this represents. And it's actually the first acquisition that Richard Brown made. Purchased in 1965, it began the collection of Asian art here at the Kimbell, and it still stands as one of the defining monuments of the Asian collection.
One of the greatest acquisitions made by the Kimbell was its card sharps.
Caravaggio created a completely new type of painting in this work. And part of its appeal is the kind of illusionism, the way that he seems to be painting something that we're participating in, and we're being led into this deception, this fraud that's happening before our eyes.
Card sharps was in its day an extremely famous painting, a landmark painting, a genre subject treated in realistic terms by an artist who had just arrived in Rome. We know that it's the painting that made his reputation. It was also one of the most copied pictures of the 17th century. And therein lies the difficulty, because there have been any number of candidates for the original.
One of the most exciting things about our acquisition process is that our research has led to rediscoveries of lost works. Our Caravaggio is just one example of this, but there are several others.
One of the things that fascinated me about this painting by the young Michelangelo was that it was based on a print by Schongauer, and that the painting was created in the late 15th century. It's called his first painting. It's the first painting we know about.
I learned about the painting from Ted Pillsbury, a previous director of the Kimbell. He told me that a painting by Michelangelo had been rediscovered, and it was then in the conservation lab at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And within a week or so, I went to New York with Claire Barry, our conservator, to see the painting. And when the painting was cleaned, the quality of the painting came out. It was obscured under dirty varnish. And then when the painting was x-rayed, the changes that Michelangelo made became evident. And these changes, or pentimenti, made clear that this was the original painting and not a copy after another work.
For example, in a late stage of painting, Michelangelo went around and perfected the contours by adding background color along the edges of many of the forms. In the X-radiograph, this ends up looking like a little bit of a halo. This is the X-radiograph. Here you see some old worm tunnels. But I think if you look around the contours of the figures, you see kind of a white, what looks like a white line. This is the result of Michelangelo going back in and perfecting the contours with the light background color. And then in the middle, you see all kinds of marks and notations that we didn't really understand, but I think we understand them better now after more examination with our new infrared camera, which has a very sensitive detector. This, for example, this is a compass that he used probably to establish a plumb line. I was very impressed with Eric because I was trying to put myself in his shoes. And for this to be the first acquisition he would make at the Kimbell, it was a real act of daring and courage.
That's been a remarkable symbiotic relationship between the Fortsums and the various directors of the Kimbell. I think that's the real key to the success of the Kimbell, that they have understood that the Kimbell had to grow in areas and in ways that they might not, that the founders may not have seen, but that this is what was going to keep it on the map and keep it relevant to the audience at Fort Worth, and indeed to an international audience.
They quoted to me the people that had been through the museum, and the number of them, and I said that is the people that Mr. Kimbell wanted to see the pictures. That's what it was all for. Mm-hmm.
I think the Kimbell fits at the top of the major museums, despite the fact that Fort Worth is not Paris or London or New York or Chicago.
Do you go yourself sometimes? Yes, I go real often, and there's many things yet I enjoy, that the way they've hung them and the way people receive them when you go down there and hear the comments. It's a source of great satisfaction. Of course, they don't know that we built the museum, but sometimes the guard sort of whispers, you know, and they'll come up and ask me about them.
And then what do you tell them?
Well, I just tell them I'm glad they're there.
The idea of excellence is one that we recognize is in constant process of revision, rethinking, and so forth. But I would say that over the years, the Kimbell has been very, very good at zeroing in on what is truly great. And to take an example of their Caspar David Friedrich, this is another artist who would not have been on anybody's list of the most important artists to have represented. Today, no museum would think it had really represented 19th century painting without a Caspar David Friedrich. And quite early on in the game, the Kimbell was on the mark and secured a really extraordinary picture.
The Kimbell has an extraordinary collection of Baroque art, from its great Caravaggio to one of Georges de Latour's masterpieces, to the great Louis Lenain painting.
They have incredible things like the Fra Angelico, the Murillo, the two Poussins that are kind of bookends in terms of periods. I mean, everything, it fits, and they were very, very careful in what they bought.
It's wonderful having this earlier Poussin and then having a Poussin from his more classicizing period. One of the exciting things that will be seen for the first time in this exhibition will be the newly cleaned Poussin ordination, which Claire Barry, the Kimbell's conservator, has just worked on.
This painting is in phenomenal condition for a painting of the 17th century. He painted this picture with the idea that it would be varnished because it depends on this even saturating coat of varnish to bring all the colors to life.
The colors of this painting are really extraordinary. It shows Poussin as a very great colorist. The combinations of colors are really remarkable.
The painting was cleaned because over the past several years, the natural resin varnish had become very yellowed and cloudy and really flattened the composition, the illusion of space, and it altered the artist's original colors. We've regained a great sense of volume. The figures look much more sculptural with the removal of the old varnish. They really seem to stand more convincingly in space. I love how the foliage has a much greater sense of volume. It's really been a transformation.
It is a major addition to the Kimbell's collection. It is Poussin at the absolute high point of his career. This is without question the most important Old Master painting to come up for auction in at least 20 years.
And we did our own examination. We x-rayed the painting. We took extensive digital photographs. Sometimes we create an infrared digital mosaic when there's interesting underdrawing to be seen. We look at the painting under the microscope. There's a lot of information that we can pull out of this X-radiograph. So it's full of information just about condition alone, but also the artist's technique, where you can see, characteristics of brushwork, for example, in the beautiful drapery, Christ drapery, where you can see the path of the artist's brush. In the case of the Poussin, you don't see major pentimenti in the X-ray, but interestingly enough, you do see pentimenti just on the surface of the painting. He made these little subtle adjustments. I think he possibly repositioned the head of this apostle. We see a slight halo around that head. So it just, I think, speaks to how carefully calibrated the composition was down to the smallest details.
The Fortsons and the board decided that this was too good an opportunity to pass up, and then just a few days before Christmas we decided to go for it.
The Kimbell, given its size and its desire for excellence, you bring into the equation a sense of what is qualitatively superior, worthy of being shown.
This painting caused quite a stir when it was bought by the Kimbell Art Museum. It was a daring and bold purchase.
It's one of the most important late paintings by Matisse. And it's one of those paintings that he photographed in the process of its creation, so we see the changes that he made.
After we acquired the Matisse and it came to the studio for the first time, we started to notice there was some interesting, what looked like underdrawing in the lower left quadrant. He wiped away all of the black paint and he completely repainted this part of the picture, converted the black to red. Instead of incised lines, he drew them in crayon, and then he re-signed and redated the picture.
It's a painting which appears to be fresh and is in fact very labored. It's the genius of Matisse to make that which is hard to do seem effortless. That's one of his great marks.
It also forms something of a bookend to our collection. It's the most recent work in the collection. It's from 1946.
And it was Richard Brown who said that the Kimbell should strive to form a collection of the highest aesthetic quality from all periods of man's history in any medium and any style. And I think that right there is what defines the collection, and it's still what we strive for in every acquisition that we make.
It's incredible that the Kimbell owns this painting because it comes from Ducho's Maestà, which is a landmark in the history of art. It's a true masterpiece, and you find Ducho's Maestà in all history of art books. It's remarkable that it should have ended up in a place like Fort Worth, Texas. This is one of Rubens' most magnificent sketches.
The subject is the Duke of Buckingham, who is an important figure in British history. He became the favorite of King James I.
And he seems to have pulled out all the stops when he created this sketch, and you get a sense of his beauty and also of his supreme self-confidence.
And this amazing Picasso had come to the Kimbell Art Museum in Fort Worth to be really one of the icons of our modern collection. A spectacular painting, a rigid sense of symmetry that make it a profoundly imposing image. It's a very, very strong painting. You can see it from hundreds of feet away and realize this is something I need to see. Here's an artist contending with his subject with a real sense of force and with a real sense of his own power. It's kind of characteristic of Picasso, isn't it? To have that sense of bravado and optimism and, shall we say, I can do anything. And indeed he could.
Every single acquisition has been a gem, with almost no exceptions. So I always enjoy going there because it is an experience to be in that Louis Kahn building with that gem-like collection.
Well, the Kimbell has become, is known all over the world for its building and its collections. But what means most to me, I think, is how loved the Kimbell is in Texas and in our region, and seeing the excitement on children's faces as they encounter great works of art, and you know the great impact that the Kimbell is going to make on the lives of so many children in our region. And this amazing combination of building and collection. And people connect to this building. They feel a personal relationship. And I say this about people from our region, but then as I said before, people from all over the world, they come to the museum and they have this, they feel like the Kimbell belongs to them.
So I look at my work with a sense of what is forthcoming, the yet not said, the yet not made, is what puts sparks of life into you.
It's not easy to stand up against Louis Kahn. Fort Worth isn't a large city, but they've got a museum that is, I think, considered worldwide a jewel.
Of course we're changing, of course we're evolving, we're becoming a larger institution, but we're going to remain true to our principles.
The Kimbell was never conceived to be a closed collection. So I think that this was inevitable.
You couldn't have the kind of exhibitions they have and at the same time show your permanent collection. They didn't have the space.
And I think in selecting Renzo Piano, the Kimbell Art Foundation chose the perfect architect for this project.
41 years ago, I stood on this site with my aunt, Velma Kimbell, as she took this very shovel and broke ground for the Louis Kahn building. Our sole instructions from my uncle, K. Kimbell, were that we establish a museum of the first class. This was our guiding principle on that June day in 1969, and it has remained the guiding principle ever since. Today, we usher in a new era for the Kimbell, with the addition of a building by the extraordinary architect Renzo Piano, to complement Louis Kahn's masterpiece.
They wanted something that served the purposes in terms of light and space and so on, and taste, but not a blatant statement. I mean, the Kimbell is an example of what museum architecture ought to be and what their acquisitions programs ought to be. So I think one has to live up to those standards. I feel pretty sure that Renzo Piano will be cognizant of all these things.
Renzo Piano has been called an absolute master of light, and his work has been celebrated around the world.
Thank you.
Just hold it up on opening day.
With this new building, we hope to have another architectural jewel.
Something like that.
But where do you see it starting here?
Maybe a bit further down.
I like that.
And integrity in a building comes from the fact that everything it's from the beginning to the end, everything comes together.
58.
You measure.
I measure.
The merge from the car park into the building is natural because I use concrete. Everything becomes like a sculpture.
I like that idea. Then you can.
Hey, what did that say? Great idea.
So I think this is a very good plan. Two complementary buildings by two major architects.
Generations of our children will be exposed to the wonders of art in the Piano Building's classrooms, and countless Fort Worthians and others will enjoy beautiful music in the state-of-the-art auditorium. This is indeed an exciting day.